All right, tonight's Shiur Nishmat Avi Morido Ber Renu and Alevi Imim Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And this week we have the privilege of reading Parshat Bo, which marks the transition from Moshe's only job being to talk to Pharaoh to his new job of being the lawgiver. Up until now, he's been the one who is Hashem's spokesman to Pharaoh. In this week's Parsha, we have the switch, and it begins in chapter 12, which is, we're going to talk about the first mitzvah that Hashem tells Moshe to give to Am Yisrael, which is actually a twofold mitzvah we're going to see in a minute. And let's go right to the sources. So away we go. We're in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And verse 1 is pretty straightforward. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron b'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. Hashem speaks to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, and he tells them the following: HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. HaChodesh can mean two things. Chodesh can mean something that's new. Chodesh can also mean a month, and we're going to see both of those interpretations sort of as we go through the commentaries on this verse. Lachem, it should be to you, Rosh Chodashim, the head of the months. Rishon hu lachem, it is first to you, l'chadshei hashana, to the months of the year. So we have, it seems to be a twofold mitzvah here. One is something about Rosh Chodesh, something is about the months of the year. So we're going to see how the Parshanim discuss this verse and see what all of this means as we go on. And perhaps at the end, if we have a little bit more time, we're going to have a little bit more discussion about the Jewish calendar, which this verse forms the basis thereof. So HaChodesh Hazeh, Rashi says that the word HaChodesh refers not to a month, but it refers to the new, something new. Chadash, as I said, the word Chadash, Chodesh are related because, as of this, we're going to see in a minute, Rashi says the following: HaChodesh Hazeh means this newness, this thing that is new. And Rashi says, Hera'u levana b'chidusha. Hashem showed Moshe the moon in its renewal. As we know, the moon waxes and wanes every month. It starts out as a very, very small sliver, grows till it's full, and then starts shrinking again. And it repeats the cycle every 29 and a half days. So Hashem shows Moshe the moon as it is beginning, as it is renewing itself at the beginning. The Omar Lo, and he said to him, Kishayareach mitchadesh, when the moon begins its renewal phase, Yiyelecha Rosh Chodesh. That should be the sign for you that it's the beginning of a new month. So we have months based on a lunar calendar. When we see the new moon, it's a new month. And that's why the word Chodesh for month is related to this word Chadash, new. However, Rashi then adds, Ein mikra yotze mivdei pshuto. However, if I look at this verse in its simple sense, I have to translate it slightly different. That what does it mean? Al Chodesh Nisan Amarlo. That Hashem is speaking to Moshe and telling him that the month we are in now, the month of Nisan, which is when he is speaking to Moshe at this point in time, just after the plague of darkness and before the plague of the firstborn and the Exodus. So Rashi says Hashem is speaking to Moshe during the month of Nisan, and he tells him that this whole verse is really referring to the month of Nisan. Amar Lo, Hashem is speaking to him, and what is he saying? Zeh yihye rosh l'seder minyan chadashim. This month should be the head of the order for counting the months. She'iyar karu sheni, that the next month is called the second month. Sivan shlishi, the third month is called the third month. In other words, when we count months according to the Jewish calendar, Nisan is the first month, Iyar is the second month, Sivan is the third month, till we get to Adar, which is the 12th month. Now Rashi adds another thing. HaChodesh Hazeh, this. Now we know in general that when I say this something or other, when I use the word this, Hazeh, in the Torah, it means something I can point to. So Rashi explains based on the Midrash that it says that what does it mean that this new month, this newness of the moon, renewal of the moon? What do you mean this? So what does it mean? Kasha Moshe al Molad Halavana be'ezeh shiur tir'eh v'tiyeh ru'uya lekadesh. Moshe was unable to understand it from a theoretical perspective. How far the moon has to be, how visible does it have to be in order for it to be called new enough to sanctify and say, this is the new moon, this is the new month. The Heralo be'etzban Hashem showed him with his finger at Halavana Barakia. He showed him the moon in the sky. The Amar Lo and said to Moshe, Kazeh, when you see the moon that looks exactly like it does right now, Ra'eh v'kadesh. This is what you have to see and sanctify and say, yes, it's a new moon. So basically, Rashi says the word Zeh is because Moshe couldn't figure it out without an actual practical example, and Hashem gave him the practical example. The Ketzad hero, but now then Rashi has a problem. How could he possibly have shown him the moon? Because we know, we know that Hashem only spoke to Moshe during the day, not at night, at least while he was in Egypt. It was the day that Hashem spoke to Moshe in the land of Egypt. On the day Hashem commanded him. Number of different cases where Rashi brings in the word Hayom that Shem seems to imply that Hashem only spoke to Moshe during the day. How can he show him the moon? The moon's not visible during the day. So the answer Rashi gives, that Hashem showed him the moon literally as the sun was setting, so that immediately after, even though Hashem spoke to him, it was still daytime. By the time he finished speaking to him and he looked up to see the moon, the sun had already set and it was nighttime. Very interesting little comment. And the reason I want to bring it down is because the whole concept of night versus day. One of the things about the moon is if you study the moon and you study its phases, you understand a lot about, you have to understand a lot about astrology. If you go through Rambam's explanation of how we determine the calendar, it's 20 parakim long, 19 or 20 parakim long, and it's very, very intricate in terms of understanding constellations and star movements and a whole lot of stuff. So we're going to leave that for now. Rashbam, now I'm going to go back to this. Rosh Chodeshim. Rashbam wants to say that Nisan is the first month. Why? Because it's Kerebi Yoshua, according to Rabbi Yoshua, who says Nisan Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created in the month of Nisan. We have a machloket in the Gemara whether the world, when Hashem creates the world, when he creates Adam, is it on the first of Tishrei or the first of Nisan? Now we know we always say Rosh Hashanah is the day that Adam is created. We say that in our tefillah. But Rashbam is saying that here, from this perspective, from the perspective of this pasuk, it seems to imply that it's like Rabbi Yoshua. That just like Rabbi Yoshua says that the world was created in Nisan, that's why Nisan is the first of the months. However, he then tries to reconcile this with Rabbi Eliezer. As far as counting months of the year, Nisan is number one. Any time in the Torah where it gives us the number of the months, after the Torah is given, after this point in time when Hashem is speaking to Moshe, what happens in Bereshit is a whole different argument, a different discussion. But from this point on, whenever Hashem mentions a number of a month, remember the months in the Torah don't have names. We're going to see later on where those names come from. But the months in the Torah are first month, second month, third month, fourth month, through 12th month. That's all we have. We don't have any names for months. What Rashi is telling us that every time, or Rashbam is saying, is that every time we have a number associated with the month, if you want to know what month it is, you start with Nisan and you count Nisan, what we call Nisan 1, then the next month, the next month, the next month, in that order. So that's how we count the months. And that's what the Torah does. Torah always gives months numbers. Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the world was created in Tishrei, how can he explain that if Tishrei is the seventh month? This is how he would explain these verses. The This month is to you, the Jewish people. Even though what we call Nisan is not the first month for the rest of the world. The rest of the world starts, well, today the rest of the world starts in January. But the rest of the world starts in Tishrei at the time of the Torah, because that's when the world was created, according to Rabbi Eliezer. However, for you, the Jewish people, Lachem Yerosh Chodashim, Limnot Shishi, Shvi, Shmini, Chi, Chodesh, Demasar, Chodesh Adar. Nisan is going to be the first month, and that's the way we count till we get to the 12th month, which is Adar. Mimenu Tamanu Liot Lachem Lezikaron. Why do we count this way? It should always be something every time we mention the month, we should remember Kivo Yitzatem Mitzrayim, that's the month we left Egypt. So the reason we count months from this month, is because we're saying so many months since we left Egypt. That's the way we always want to count the months. Torah, when the Torah calls the month that Rosh Hashanah, what we call Rosh Hashanah falls, the seventh month. Why is it the seventh month? Because it's Liyarach Yitziat Mitzrayim Perusha. It means the seventh month when we count from the time we left Egypt. And he says, not only do we count months from Yitziat Mitzrayim, but there are times in the Tzach where it also counts years from Yitziat Mitzrayim. We see that they count months because we find that when Bnei Yisrael reach Har Sinai, the Torah says, "B'chodesh hashlishi l'teit Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim," in the third month after the Jews had left Egypt. The Chain B'Binyan Habayit, when Shlomo comes to build the Beit HaMikdash, it says, "Vayi b'shmoni v'shana v'arba me'ot shana l'shetzet Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim." It counts it as the 480th year from the time the Jews left Egypt. So we have this concept of always counting, always being cognizant of the Exodus in a way, the way we count and list dates. We don't count from some other number. We count from the time we left Egypt. That's why we have the months as we have them. Chorshor. Chorshor. HaChodesh Hazel Lachem. Now, what is it, Lachem Rosh? It's the head of Lecherut, to your freedom. This is the month that you're going to go free. The Oto, and therefore it, Tasun Rishon Leminyan Chodshecha, because it is the month that you left Egypt to your freedom, it is the month that you should count first in your counting. Kedei Timnu Mishar HaCherut, in order that you should count from your freedom from Egypt. Ubezot, and through this, Tizkar Lachem Sha'at HaCherut, you'll remember that you left and you became free, but also, more importantly, Shetizkaru et Hatovah Shasniti Imachem. Through remembering the Exodus, we remember, how did we get out? Hashem took us out. V'tiyu zehirim b'yirati u'ba'avati u'ba'avodati. And through remembering the Exodus, every time you write a date on something, you'll remember you're dating it from the Exodus. Hashem took us out of Egypt, and that's why we have to be careful to be in awe and to love Hashem and to serve Hashem. Very, very simple, straightforward. It's Kuni, a little bit more complicated, but he's going to reach the same point. Okay. First and foremost, he wants to focus on the concept of Chodesh. HaChodesh hazeh. HaChodesh nikra Chodesh v'yareach. B'shvil chidush or hayareach. The month is called a month, but it's also called Yerach. It's also called, there are two words in Hebrew for month. There's the word Chodesh, which means month. There's the word Yerach, which means month. One is because Chadash, because it's newness. The other is what is becoming new, the Yareach, so we call it Yerach. The month is called Yerach, just like the moon is called. Moon also has two names, Levana and Yareach. But that's a different story. But here it's called Yareach. Hazeh, when the Torah says Hazeh, that means Zeh Nisan. It's referring to Nisan. And how do we know it's Nisan? Because you Omer, Chag HaAsif Tekufat HaShana, that Chag HaAsif, the gathering harvest, is at the end of the year. Chag HaAsif B'tzei HaShana, there's one gathering at the beginning of the year, there's one gathering at the end of the year. In other words, the harvest time goes from the beginning of, or the middle of the spring through the summer months. Say if we go and calculate, what What month is the ingathering of all the crops and the end of the year? Shashana Yotzeit, that the year ends with it. Karui Shavi, and it's called the seventh month. Ki Deferish parshat Emor, as we're going to see in the parshat of Emor, which deals with the festivals, that the month in which Sukkot falls is called the seventh month. Same month of Tishrei that Rosh Hashanah falls. In the seventh month of the year, when you are gathering in your crops. Now, we don't gather in any crops in Nisan. So therefore, seventh has to be prior, a different time. Seventh can't be Tishrei, because if Tishrei was the first, then Nisan would be the seventh, and we don't gather in the crops in Nisan. The only way we can find this is that the seventh month is Tishrei. If the seventh is the month that we call Tishrei, Nisan has to be the first. And even though I can't necessarily prove it because it's a circular proving, nonetheless, in Megillat Esther, we have, it says, B'chodesh Harishon in the first month, which is Chodesh Nisan. So there in Megillat Esther, that's, by the way, this is when Haman is throwing the lots. It gives the date when he threw his lots to pick the day to kill all the Jews. It says B'chodesh Harishon in the first month, which is the month of Nisan. So there we see that Nisan is the first month. Again, as we saw above, Lachem, this is specifically for the Jewish people that we have this count, not for the rest of the world. The lowly umot acherot, not for other people. Why? Because they don't even use a lunar calendar. They count their time based on solar time. We are different. We have lunar time, not solar time. When we look at a calendar, Jewish calendar, it's based on the lunar time, not the solar time. However, Rosh Chodeshim, even though Nisan is the leader of the months in terms of counting the months, it's not the Rosh Hashanah for everything. Avolo l'shanim, lishmitim, uliyovlim, linitiyav, liyirakot. All of these things that we just listed here are all in Tishrei. In other words, in Tishrei is when we change the year number. We don't change from 5785 to 5786 in Nisan. We change in Tishrei. Shemitah, a Shemitah year begins with Rosh Hashanah in Tishrei, not in Nisan. Yovel also begins in Tishrei, not in Nisan. Nitiyah, the fiscal year for determining when we have to give tithes, also begins in Tishrei, and so too for vegetables, for determining all sorts of laws relating to agriculture. Tishrei is the beginning of the year, not Nisan. Nisan is the first year strictly for dating the months. That's it. And there are a couple of other things, but that's basically it. And we know that all of these things happen only in Tishrei. Chizkuni tells, this is Chizkuni, right? Yeah, Chizkuni says the following. He says, Shenemar, how do I know that I count years from Tishrei, not from Nisan? When does the Shemitah year end? Right before the Chag HaSukkot. V'im Nisan hu kvaliyot Rosh Hashanah, ma'lo yitzav HaKadosh Baruch Hu likro Torah b'Chag HaMatzot. The whole hakel, the whole concept of gathering the people together, which happens at Sukkot, is because that's the end of the Shemitah year, not Pesach. That's how he proves that Shemitah and Yovel both begin with Rosh Hashanah, not with the first of Nisan. The Ode, and similarly, he says, Matzino Chag HaSif T'Kuchat HaShanah v'Chag HaSif Tet HaShanah L'ma Lemdecha Misham Matchelet Tfilat HaShanah. The beginning of the year is Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, not Nisan, even though Nisan, as I said, is the first of the month. Rosh Chodashim, the head of the months, Shomea Ani Miut Shnai, Chodashim Shnayim, Talmud Lomar L'Chodshei HaShanah. I would know from the fact that it says Chodashim, months, plural, that's a minimum of 2 months in every year. But since it says a year, we have to have months to make up a year. How many months make up a year? Great question. Sometimes 12 and sometimes 13. Rishon Hu, and how is he going to say? Rishon Hu, it has to be the first. Shenemar, why is Nisan always the first month? Shenemar Shamor et Chodesh Aviv. We are to guard that Pesach always happens in the springtime. The month that is in the spring is when we have to have Pesach. And our whole calendar is based on that. The month of Pesach, the holiday of Pesach, has to be in the spring. So I might think, since it tells me that I have to make Pesach in the spring, if a year happened and Pesach and Nisan came and it was still not springtime, I would think, Yavru et Nisan, I should make 2 Nisans, not 2 Adars. Normally we would say, okay, we've got to the 15th of Nisan, it's still not spring yet, so we're going to have to do Nisan again. So we'll have Nisan Aleph and Nisan Bet. Ella imamarta ke nimtza osa Nisan Sheni. If that were the case, just like we have an Adar Sheni, we would have to have a Nisan Sheni. Can't have a Nisan Sheni. Why? Because a Torah Amar lach bishon lachem. It has to be the first. So we can only have one Nisan because it has to be the first. So therefore, the leap month that we make to adjust the calendar back to the solar calendar cannot be in Nisan. Lahadchil bo cheshbon chodshei hashana. I have to, Nisan has to be the first. And it doesn't matter whether the year is 12 lunar months or 13 lunar months. In any case, Nisan has to be first, and therefore the month that we double cannot be Nisan. Now we know we have to add a 13th month because the Torah always tells us that years are made up only of full months. You can only have a full month in a year. You can't have a half a month in a year and then start a new year with only half a month. So we need to add a full month, and therefore we know that the Torah tells us that we are that sometimes the year is 13 months and sometimes it's 12 months. Because the month in which spring falls, the spring time of Pesach falls, has to be called Nisan, and it has to be the first month. And similarly, and therefore Shvuah will fall when we've already got enough of a crop to bring the first of the wheat crop, wheat harvest. Rishon hu lachem mikan v'elach hu rishon. From here on, Pesach Nisan is the first month. As we saw before in Bechor Shor, since we will count the months from our freedom, you'll remember that Hashem is the one who took us out of Mitzrayim, this wonderful thing that Hashem did for us. From the creation of the world, creation of mankind, till now, Tishrei Rishon v'Nisan Shvi. Tishrei was the first month and Nisan was already the 7th month. It's only now with the Jews leaving Egypt that we, the Jewish people, change the numbers of the months. As it says in the book of Kings, when Shlomo Melech builds the Beit HaMikdash, it says he calls all of Am Yisrael together, B'yerach Eitanim B'chag. He gathers everybody together in the month of Eitanim, which, as we know, is the holiday that falls in Eitanim, is Sukkot. U'mitargim Yonatan, and Yonatan translates that verse as B'yarcha Datikaya Karu LeYarcha Kadma'a U'Ka'an Hu Yarcha Shvi'ah. The month, Shlomo gathered everybody to celebrate the inauguration of the Beit HaMikdash during the month of Tishrei, which was the month that in antiquity was called the first month, and now we call it the 7th month. And that's how Yonas explains the month of Eitanim. And therefore we see that once upon a time, the whole world, including the Jewish people prior to leaving Egypt, also counted the months from Tishrei, not from Nisan. L'chadshei Hashana. Now, one more thing. We have names. We don't use the first month, second month, third month. We have names for the months. So what are the months of the year? We know that Nisan is Rishon, Iyar, Sheni, Sivan, Shlishi. However, he says, V'chol Shemot HaChodashim. All of the months that we have today, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, all of these names, Einon, Lashon HaKodesh, these are not Jewish names. They're not originally Jewish. El Lashon Kasdim. They are brought back from Babylonia. They are the Babylonian months of the names. Lefikach, lo tzimtza shem echad mehem b'chol hamikra. You will not find any of these names in the Torah or in the earlier Nevi'im, before the exile to Babylonia. Rak, the only place you'll find these names in all of Tanakh are in the books of Chagai, Zechariah, Daniel, and Esther. And Ezra and Nehemiah also, if I'm not mistaken. These are the months, Those were those all happened in the exile. After the Jews had been exiled, the temple had been destroyed. However, we do find a couple of the months did have older Hebrew names. Well, they are Yerach Ziv, Yerach Etanim, and Yerach Bul. Those are the three that have names. But most of the names were lost to us. We now have these names that we brought back from Babylonia. We're going to see it later when we get to Ramban. Is going to talk a little bit about that also, the names of the months. Ibn Ezra. Now, Ibn Ezra is going to try to explain the whole process here, okay, of how do we calculate when the new month is, or how do we understand the whole setup of the Jewish calendar. Okay, first he quotes Rabbi Yehuda Parsi, who says, Yisrael ha'yumonim k'fi shanot hachama k'mishpat ha'relim. Up until this time, just like the rest of the world, we counted the world according to solar years. And he brings a proof that we should celebrate the holiday of Pesach every year at this time. Because a lunar year doesn't work. Because a lunar year, if I want to keep all of the festivals and all of the observances aligned with their time that they happened, I have to go according to the solar year, according to the seasons of the year. The low deeper nechona, but he didn't fully explain it, is what Ibn Ezra says. And I'm going to explain it. He goes into a whole lot of detail. I've skipped some of it, but we have to know the following: that the time that the moon renews itself every month and goes back to being at the same place relative to the sun so that we see the same shadow of the moon is every 29 and a half days plus 2/3 of an hour, which is 40 minutes, and 73 chalakim, which is actually 4 minutes and 1 chelek. Now, 1 chelek is not to be translated as a second. Chelek is actually 3 1/3 seconds. And the reason, because there are 1080 chalakim in an hour, which comes out to 18 chalakim per minute, not 60 the way the Greeks did it. So we have this thing called a chelek, and the reason they chose this thing called a chelek is because that's how they determined the moon, the lunar cycle. And in reality, he says, there's no such thing as a lunar year, because lunar year is an oxymoron. Just like, he's going to say in a minute, solar month is an oxymoron. Because really, a year is determined by the sun. The seasons are based on solar time, on the movement of the earth around the sun. Which has 4 seasons, 4 quarters of the year, and therefore it's Ishana, it's 1 year. The and it starts when the sun is in when the moon is seen in the constellation Aries. The earth will go around, and the moon's around for it goes around in its orbit for 365 and approximately 365 and 1/4 days. Until it returns to the same point. Because of this phenomena, that it now returns to the same point it was 365 and 1/4 days ago, Zenikra Shana. It's called Shana, which comes from Lishanot, to renew, to return, to come back, to start all over again, also to review. All of those are related words, and that's why a year is called a year in Hebrew, Shana, because we now come back to the start point. And this is very, very clearly, Ein Lilvana Shana Kalal. We cannot talk about a lunar year because it doesn't work. Kasher Ein L'Shemesh Chodesh Kalal. Just like there's no such thing as a solar month, because the months have nothing to do with the sun. A month has to do with the moon. It's how frequently the moon renews itself. Ki lo yitchadesh b'shemesh davar. The reason we don't have a solar month per se is because the word month is based on renewal. the sun doesn't change, that it needs to be renewed. The sun is there all the time. It's always full. There's no first quarter, second, full moon, full sun, and new sun. It's all the same. The only thing that renews is the amount of light that is reflected from the moon, amount of the solar light that's reflected from the moon. That's why a month sometimes is called a yareach, a month, sometimes it's or yarach, a month, sometimes it's called a chodesh, a month. There are two same words for the same word because month is related to the movement of the moon, or the movement of the moon relative to the sun. And it's called that because of the newness, the renewal of the light of the moon that has disappeared for a period of time at the end of the month. Because the moon doesn't have its own light. It only reflects the light of the sun. However, the sun doesn't get dark, except when there is a time when the two exactly coincide and what we call an eclipse. It doesn't matter where you Rosh Hashanah, wherever that might happen. The lo yitiyeh and there will not be this for the moon. The moon is completely different. If it falls into the place where the moon disappears every month at the time when it's exactly opposite the sun that we can't see it. Now, however, he says, since the Goyim, the year of the Goyim is approximately one solar year, because again, they keep a year of 365 days as opposed to 365 and a quarter. And they saw that 12 times, they go through 12 lunar cycles in a solar year. They divided the year up to 12 into 12 portions. They called each portion a month. So that's why we have, even in the solar year, we have 12 months. But none of those months are actually a lunar month, because a lunar month is either 29 or 30 days. And the months in the solar calendar are either 28, 30, or 31 days. But since they're approximately the same, they used the term month. It doesn't really match up with the actual reality. Now, then he goes to, so he's talked about the Julian calendar that was adopted by the Christians. Now he's going to talk about the Muslim calendar. Gama Yishmaelim. Now the Muslims use a straight lunar calendar. Their holidays are strictly based on the lunar calendar, but their lunar calendar is not a solar adjusted lunar calendar like ours is. And the beginning of the month is just like ours when they see the moon. And since the Muslims saw, we have 12 months, they couldn't come to any closer, because if they'd have gone to 13 months all the time, then the year would go the other way. So they went to 12 months, because that's what the Christians did. So they chose 12 months. There's only a difference of 11 days between 12 lunar months and the solar year. The Muslims made all of their years lunar years. And every year, the days of their festivals slide back in the solar year 11 days because of the difference. Till every 34 years, 34 lunar years, they equals 33 solar years. And then they quote, catch up. Because they don't match up. That's the whole point. He's saying is that you have to, if you do a straight lunar year, you're going to lose, you're going to go out of whack with the seasons. If you have a straight solar year, then you can't match up with the way the moon goes. So Hashem tziva b'torato. Hashem told us, our calendar is based on lishmar moed b'moado, that we have to observe the holidays in the appropriate season. That Pesach has to be in the spring. And we similarly find Nasa Pesach b'chodesh hasamuch elav. And since we can't, if it happens that Aviv hasn't happened by the time we get to halfway through Nisan, we have to add a month so that Pesach will be. We have to push Pesach back a month. The Kachal Karach Chag Shavuot, and the same thing with Chag Shavuot is called Chag HaKatzir, the holiday when we start harvesting. The Sukkot Chag HaSif, Ki HaKatzir VaSif Teluyim BaAviv, because all of these are based on getting Pesach time right, then we can get Shavuot time right and Sukkot time right. Now, both Pesach and Sukkot happen exactly in the middle of the month. Now, Hashem has also told us that our years are based on the lunar calendar. But at the same time, we have to protect that the holidays fall in the proper seasons. Moshe never says, oh, a year is 12 months or 13 months. Whichever month is the spring, that's when we count as month number 1. And it will be called the first month. And it doesn't matter whether we have 12 months or 13 months. And that's why the month we always add is the month of Adar. That's why we have the months are counted based on Nisan. Now, the months that we call today, Nisan, Iyar, V'Sivan, Chol Shmona Chodoshim, Einam Lashon Kodesh, as we saw above. These are not times that were given by the Jews. El Him Lashon Kazdim. This is the name that the Babylonians gave them. Al-Kain. Oh, we read all this. This is basically the same thing we had. Right? Did I just flip back? Yeah, okay. And that's why he says the same thing we saw above with same thing that the Chizkuni said above, that these all came from Bavel. And okay, and then he goes into trying to line them up. And the fact is, so again, all of these, we have the original names which did not have names, or they had, some of the months had names, but the names that we use today are the names that came from Bavel, and I think Ramban is going to go and explain a little bit better why we chose those names, why we picked those names, took them back with us. Okay, so let's get to Ramban. HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodoshim. Zu mitzvah rishona shetiva Kadosh Baruch Hu et Yisrael al Yidei Moshe. Since this is the first commandment that Hashem is giving to the Bnei Yisrael through Moshe, up until now Moshe has had one job. His job has been very simply to talk to Paro, to get Paro to let the Jews go out. Now, with this mitzvah, Hashem is giving Moshe a new charge, and that is to teach the Torah, teach the mitzvot to the Am Yisrael, to be the one who's going to teach Am Yisrael. This is the first mitzvah. The Chain Omar Bi Eretz Mitzrayim, and that's why it precedes this by saying, to tell them that this mitzvah was given to them before the Torah is given. This mitzvah of the calendar is the beginning of the mitzvot of the Torah, even though it's before Matan Torah. All the rest of the mitzvot were given to Moshe at Har Sinai. Oh, that's one reason why it might say Be'eretz Mitzrayim. The other is, Ramban says, oh, Shebalomar Be'eretz Mitzrayim, tell us that in the land of Egypt, below Be'er Mitzrayim, and not in the city, in the capital city, Kemoshe Amar Rabbeinu, that B'chutz L'krach, that Hashem only spoke to Moshe when he was outside of the boundaries of the city limits of the capital, because there was too much idolatry in the capital. Hashem didn't want to speak to Moshe. By the way, there's one exception to that, but that's a whole different story. And it would have been appropriate if Hashem had said first to Moshe, Dabro kol adat Yisrael lemor. First speak to Am Yisrael and tell them HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. That it should have started with tell this to Bnei Yisrael, not HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, just giving him the mitzvah. He should have introduced it by saying, tell Am Yisrael. However, why doesn't it do that? Moshe v'Aaron hem bimkom Yisrael. Moshe and Aaron now, as the leaders, are the representatives of all of Yisrael. The Amar Lachem, and he says to Moshe and Aaron, you, this newness of the moon is for you. Keneged Yisrael Adorotam. For all generations, you should stand. You, the leadership, should stand in the place of the Jewish people. And then, only then, does he tell Moshe and Aaron to tell all of Am Yisrael that they have to pick the lamb and do all of the preparations for bringing the Korban Pesach that they're going to bring shortly before they leave Egypt. Well, the Midrasha. However, the Midrash wants to read another meaning into the word lachem. Lomar, why does he say hachodesh is lachem? To teach us shakodesh kiddush hachodesh tzarich bestin mumchin. In order to sanctify the new moon, you have to have a court of experts who are experts in the astronomy of understanding what the moon should look like from an astronomical basis, so they can properly question the witnesses who claim to have seen the new month. And that's why it specifically does not speak to all of the children of Israel in the first verse, but until the second. The only ones who can be involved in sanctifying the new moon are those who are like Moshe and Aaron, who are experts in understanding the phases of the moon and the visibility of the moon and where it would be seen and how it would look. So that's the first thing, is the concept of sanctifying the new moon. And the second concept is counting the months from Nisan. That we should always count this month as the first month. And that's how we count all of the months. Till the end of the year at the 12th month. Why do we do this? That through the mentioning of the months through numbers, we attach it and associate it back to the great miracle that happened in the month of Nisan. That we should remember all of the miracles Hashem did for us when He took us out of Egypt every time we mention a month. The months have no name throughout the Torah. Eloyomer, they will be called Chodesh Lishi, etc., etc., etc. They'll be called by the number. V'chein kulam, similarly all of the months. Ukemo, and similarly, Shatia has a chira b'yom HaShabbat. We also remember Shabbat. How? By calling the days of the week. They don't have names. In Hebrew, the days of the week don't have names. What do we call them? We call them Echad b'Shabbos, Sheni b'Shabbos. Today is the first day of since Shabbos, the second day of Shabbos. Kasher Faresh, as we explain later on, one of the concepts of the mitzvah of Zachoret Yom HaShabbat L'Kadsho, of remembering the Shabbos day and sanctifying it, we do every day by calling the days, the first day of Shabbos, the second day of Shabbos, the third day of Shabbos. So too, just like we remember Shabbos by counting the days by number and not by name, by counting the months, first month since our redemption, second month since our redemption, third month since the redemption. This is not to count the years. We know, as we saw already before, and Ramban is going to quote the same psukim, we already know that the year, in terms of counting fiscal years for planting and Yovel and Shevat and all these other agricultural things, starts with Tishrei. As we saw before, all these things that were quoted above. If that's the case, when we call Nisan the first month and Tishrei the seventh month, Pitro, no, it is, the explanation is Rishon leGeula uShvi Eleh. This is the first month since the redemption, seventh month since the redemption. V'zeh tam Rishon hu lachem, and that is why it says it's first only for you, the Jewish people. Sheinenu Rishon b'Shana. It's not the beginning of the year. Avlu Rishon lachem. It's for you the first. Shenikra lo lezichron geulatenu. We call and number the months based on our redemption from Egypt. And that's why it's so important to say that, have those numbers associated with it. Faris kind of understands that Inyan. Now, we go back. However, we have a different thing. Now, if that's the case, if the whole purpose of numbering the months is to remember the Exodus, then why did we leave them when we came back? When we came back after at the second temple, when we came back from Babel, the Amru, and we're going to explain that now. Amru Shmot HaChodashim Alu Imanu MiBavel. The current names that we have for the months came back when the exiles returned from the Babylonian exile. They brought these names of the months with them. They did not have any names originally. What's the reason? Originally, their whole purpose was to count them, to remember the Exodus every time we mention the month, as we said. When we returned from the Babylonian exile, and there was a partial fulfillment, and there was a fulfillment of the verse that Jeremiah said, we will no longer say, oh, praise Hashem who took us out of Egypt, but we will say, praise Hashem who brought us out of the land that we were exiled in the north, i.e. Babylonia. We had to change the names of the month to call them like we call them in Bavel. Why? To now remember that Hashem had redeemed us from not just the Egyptian exile, but from the Babylonian exile. When we came back and built the second Beit HaMikdash and returned, we had to remember that Hashem had taken us out of Bavel. So we did that by changing the nomenclature for the months from numbers to the names that we had in Bavel, to remember that we were exiled into Bavel and were redeemed. Ki Eila Hashemot, Nisan, Iyar, the Sivan, the Zulatam, all of these names, so again, we don't find except in the Nevi'im that come after the Babylonian exiles, Zechariah, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Gilad Esther. And therefore it tells us in Megillat Esther and in other places, it tells us that the first month is Nisan. Again, Od Hayom. And even today, he says, Ramban says, even in his day, Bartzot Parasum Adai in Persia, Kachem Korim Otam. They use the months names, same names that we use. Tishrei, Iyar, Sivan, etc. V'kulam kamonu, just like we have the names of the months, that's the names they have for their months. However, the reason we took them with us, which seems to imply, if I go through all of this, that once Hashem redeems us again, we're going to have to come up with new names for the months again when the Gula Shlema comes, and it should come B'meher V'yameinu. So I hope you got something out of this. It's a very interesting aspect of looking at the Jewish calendar, and it's interesting because we, unlike the Christians or the secular world that uses a strictly solar calendar, unlike the Muslims who use a strictly lunar calendar, we have a solar adjusted lunar calendar, and that's why we have leap months 7 times every 19 years to make sure that Pesach is always in the spring, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot are always in the late summer, and Sukkot has to be in the fall, because the timing of the holidays according to their seasons is of paramount importance in the Torah, so that we can remember the miracles and re-experience the miracles and relive the miracles. So, and through that, obviously acknowledge Hashem as the one who performed all these miracles for us, as we do, of course, at Pesach Seder. We do when we sit in the sukkah, etc., etc. So, thank you all. I open up now for questions, comments, or feedback at this point. Anybody has any questions? Okay. Thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the week. Those of you who are in Shul, I will not see you this Shabbat. We are going to be away. But as Jem, we'll see you all next Wednesday evening. Thank you all and have a good evening. Laila Tov.